Good morning and welcome to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting for February 13th, 2018. Madam Clerk.
Closed session agenda. Item 1. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, Todd Barr v. County of Calaveras, case number CSMCS ARB 160452.
Any public comment? Any board comments? If not, move on to the next one.
Item 2, pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, personnel matter, conference with labor negotiator Judy Hawkins, Director of Human Resources and Risk Management, regarding Deputy Sheriff's Association, Sheriff's Management Unit, Service Employees International Union, and Calaveras County Public Safety Employees Association negotiations.
Any public comments? Seeing none. Any board comments? Not. Madam Clerk.
Item 3, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D4.
Any public comments? Board comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk.
Item 4, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, two cases pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2.
Public comments? Seeing none, any board comments? If not, we will retire to closed session. Good morning. Welcome to Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting for February 13th. I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Clerk. May we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Tim, will you lead us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do you occurs there, huh?
Elementary school.
Madam Clerk.
Report of closed session. Item number 1, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, Todd Barr v. County of Calaveras, case number CSMCS ARB 160452. There was no reportable action taken. Item 2, pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, personnel matter, conference with labor negotiator Judy Hawkins, Director of Human Resources and Risk Management, regarding Deputy Sheriff's Association, Sheriff's Management Unit, Service Employees International Union, and Calaveras County Public Safety Employees Association negotiations. There was no reportable action taken. Item 3, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D4. There was a motion by Supervisor Oliveira and a second by Supervisor Clapp, directing staff to engage Barron and Bud and the California Fire lawyers and authorize initiation of litigation against PG&E as it relates to the Butte fire. Item number 4, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, two cases pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2. This closed session will be continued later in the day during the lunch break.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. At this time, Supervisor Mills, I believe you asked a chance for the floor.
Yes, this is only to announce the passing of Lawrence Woody Woodhams, holder of Calaveras County Fire Badge number 1, last Thursday in Winnemucca, Nevada.
You want a moment of silence? Take a moment of silence, please. All right. Announcements.
Announcements. This is a time for board members and county staff to provide updates of upcoming county events that may be of interest to the public.
Any member of the board? Any member of the staff? Mr. Krovitz.
Thanks.
Jeff Krovitz, Public Works. What I'm handing out right now is a 2017 status report for Public Works, going through the divisions and what was accomplished in the 2017 calendar year. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but we are going to try to make this a regular item, not necessarily for the board, but to be posted on the website so that the public has the ability to go to Public Works website and identify their items of interest and what progress we're making. So it goes through the various divisions of Public Works. It gives some statistics about the work that we've done and completed. And so I would encourage any board member to reach out to Public Works management with any questions you have on this item. So, and the idea of doing this on a regular basis. Thank you.
Mr. Krovitz. Any other staff announcements? If not, we'll move on to recognitions and acknowledgments.
Item 5 is from the Administrative Office to proclaim the week of February 11th through February 17th, 2018 as Kindness Week in Calaveras County.
Supervisor Mills.
This is a recognition of February 11th through February 17th, 2018 as Ripples of Kindness Week, whereas National Random Acts of Kindness Week will be observed February 11th through February 17th, 2018, and whereas Calaveras County has participated in Random Acts of Kindness Week since 2010, and whereas all who live and or work within Calaveras County are encouraged to practice random acts of kindness, a tradition started in Angels Camp by the Jim Bergantz family. Now, therefore, it be it proclaimed that Calaveras County Board of Supervisors recognizes the week of February 11th through 17th, 2018 to be Kindness Week throughout the county. And, Chair, I would ask for a motion.
We have a motion. I'll move.
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion and a second. Any public comments?
Bring it on.
Seeing none, we'll bring it back. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passed 5-0.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before I move on to reading the information about public comment, I just wanted to refer back to the report out of item 3 from closed session.
Okay.
So I'm going to read into the record the motion and the action again. So this is in regards to item 3, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D4 on a motion by Supervisor Oliveira and a second by Supervisor Clapp. Staff was directed to engage Barron and Budd and the California Fire lawyers and authorize initiation of litigation against PG&E as it relates to the Butte Fire. It was passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Supervisor Oliveira.
I request permission to go back to announcements for a brief announcement. I'd like to publicly thank the board clerk and the Board of Supervisors for my gavel when I served my term as chairman, and the engraving on it, which I thought was very classy, and I'll treasure this for a long time. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Madam Clerk.
Okay, public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard. So please keep in mind, we can have 5 people in the aisle not blocking the door. So if you can line up down the middle of the aisle.
5 people standing at one time only. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Marty Crane. Yes, domestic violence is here in our beautiful Calaveras County. So for a little perspective, remembering that it goes both ways, male and female, and lest we forget, I quote, "The first time he called me an effing bitch was on our honeymoon. I found out years later he had kicked his first wife on their honeymoon. A month later, he physically prevented me from leaving the house. Less than 2 months after that, I filed a protective order with the police because he punched in the glass on our front door while I was locked inside. We bought a house to make up for that one. Just after our 1-year anniversary, he pulled me naked and dripping from the shower to yell at me. Everyone loved him. People commented all the time how lucky I was. Strangers complimented him to me every time we went out. But in my home, the abuse was insidious. The threats were personal, the terror was real, and yet I stayed. When I tried to get help, I was counseled to consider carefully how what I said might affect his career. And so I kept my mouth shut and stayed. I was told, yes, he was deeply flawed, but then again, so was I. So I worked on myself and I stayed. If he was a monster all the time, perhaps it would have been easier to leave, but he could be kind and sensitive, and so I stayed. He cried and apologized, so I stayed. He offered to get help and even went to a few counseling sessions and therapy groups, and so I stayed. He belittled my intelligence and destroyed my confidence, so I stayed. I felt ashamed and trapped, and so I stayed. Friends and clergy didn't believe me, and so I stayed. I was pregnant, so I stayed. I lost the pregnancy and became depressed, and so I stayed. Abuse is indifferent to education level, socioeconomic status, race, age, or gender, and no one can ever know the dynamics of another's relationship. My cycle continued for 4 more years. Afterward, I let go and welcomed the hard work of helping, of healing, and forgiveness. My experience made me stronger and able to love more deeply, but my heart breaks for him. In the end, who is the real victim of his choices? As for me, Marty Crane, I cannot help but applaud the strength and wisdom of this woman, Jennifer Willoughby, who fought her way back from a shell of her former self to a powerful voice of fairness, respect, and change. As shared by Angela Davis, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. This is big. Calaveras, let's stay focused. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. Me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that today. I do want to say that the last time I was here, I sang a little song, and a lot of people said, God, that was great. Good words. I want to do a disclaimer. That were not my words. That was Bob Dylan. He wrote that song 50 years ago about the Russians, and it's as pertinent today as it was then. I need to apologize to Michael Oliveira. I've had an anger at you for a couple of years, and I want to tell you that my anger was dissuaded as you conducted the meetings all year long. You were very fair with everyone except Bertha Underhill. You let her talk extra long, and if she wasn't so darling, I would have jumped up and objected, but I don't hold that against you. But thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And last two things, a word that I've heard, and I don't think I've ever used it, but I want to define it for you. The word is fascism. A governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often racism. I've never called anyone a fascist pig, but the words want to come out of my mouth at times. Because a fascist is a person who is dictatorial or has extreme right-wing views. I know a few of those people. Anyway, that's my definition for the day. Finally, I want to talk about dogs. We try to have meetings. People are bringing their dogs. I know what a seeing eye dog is. I know how well trained they are. They sit down at the feet of their owner, and they're very mild and they don't cause any scene. People lately have been bringing their dogs to all these meetings. They're companion dogs. Well, you know, I need it because, I mean, we don't know why we're not allowed to ask what the disability is that allows people to bring their dogs, but we know people are allergic to animals. So help us define
Bonnie.
dogs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Bill Wilson, District 1. Amazing. Tomorrow's Valentine's Day, and we're here to do something that tomorrow may make it totally obsolete. There's a case going to be heard in New York where a young lady, she's 12 years old. She's challenging the Controlled Substance Act and the fact that marijuana is not or does not have any medical value. If she wins that case, all of this whole last year, the regulation that expires today, the UO, the tax that we paid to this county, close to, I think, $15 million now. Not quite. Some people still haven't been able to pay because some people haven't been able to do anything with their crop because a certain group of you, all of a sudden, 9 days into state regulation, decided they didn't want regulation. They would rather back the black market and unregulated growing in this county. Personally, I think that's idiotic, ignorant, and shameful. But again, that's not my decision to make. That's your gentlemen's decisions. And you people own it now, especially my district supervisor. The other thing that seems strange to me is I don't know that you gentlemen actually listen to county council. I'm sure she's advised you of certain things that you people just continue to ignore because of your steadfast adherence to your belief that you have some moratorium or mandate to turn the clock back rather than progress, rather than try to make Calaveras some kind of viable community. We went up to Yolo County. People people actually know who I am in Yolo County. God, I didn't never think that would happen. But they sympathized with us that we have a group of people on our Board of Supervisors that just don't get it. Unfortunately, I have to agree with them. That was a meeting of people that wanted to do manufacturing, testing, distribution in that county. A county that at first decided they weren't going to do it, but followed Calaveras' lead and did regulate. Only they stuck with it instead of going backwards 9 days after the state legalized it. Shame on you, gentlemen.
Good morning, Joan Wilson, District 1. Welcome to Calaveras County and another beautiful day. Oh my gosh, has the weather not been wonderful? Nice and mild. I haven't had to turn my heater up too much. It's just gorgeous. Of course, with a gorgeous winter, fire season comes. And that may not be so beautiful. Whether it's fires from PG&E or someone that wants to grow plants in a shed and has their wiring done wrong, are you prepared? Are you prepared for that situation? Are you prepared for fires? Are you prepared for what your words may cause? We have more homeless people in this county than I've ever seen. I know I've been told we don't have any homeless in this county, but I've seen them. They're here. I feel sorry for them. I wish I could help them all. But are you prepared for this? Are we prepared? My 26-year-old Army veteran and my 21-year-old son, who's an Eagle Scout, knows the concept of leadership. Be prepared. For what? Baden Powell will tell you just about anything. Gentlemen, are you prepared for what your actions might lead to? As you take on this new endeavor, please keep that in mind. Another thing that I'd like to bring up is this motion here has nothing to do with political things or political parties. I worked with the deaf and hard of hearing for years. I've worked with over 200 of them. My dad was hard of hearing. My cousin is married to a deaf person. I have many friends that are either deaf or hard of hearing. This motion means yay. This one means yeah, yeah, yeah. There should be nothing wrong with this motion. It is not disruptive. It is kind. And it is allowing us to voice our opinion. Gentlemen, I hope you listen to the words that are being said to you and listen carefully, because what you are doing is going to have an effect, not only on your families, but on many families. And we really need to be careful and think carefully on what we are doing. Thank you. Oh yeah. I wish you all a happy Valentine's Day, and don't forget, this is the time to practice love, not only for yourself or your spouse, but for everyone.
Good morning. My name is Ed Bruin. I'm from Valley Springs. My wife and I moved up here 10 years ago. We're both retired. And we had concerns, and especially me, about safety on roads up here. And I want to commend everybody that's been associated with being able to get the traffic light in Valley Springs, the left turn onto St. Andrews. I now have a real concern, and it's been a concern ever since we went to Jackson and had to travel 26 and hit the intersection of 49 and 26 in Moke Hill. Tragically, I'm sure that most of you read about the accident we had on February the 3rd up there coming out of Center Street, making a left turn on the 49 to head down to San Andreas. And I said to my wife in January, we're going up there more frequently, and a lot of our senior friends are, because there's things up in Center Street. The Ledger Hotel is great, and more people are going. Renegade Winery right there. A lot of people there. Friday nights they have special events. But there's a safety issue that I've always had in the daytime, trying to make a left turn onto Highway 49 to go to Jackson. You've got slope there coming down from San Andreas, and then you've got curves right there, and the visibility with the speed that the vehicles are going, it makes it a real challenge to make your left turn at a particular time. And this situation last month when we were up there at the Ledger, there were like 36 of us there celebrating a 70th birthday of a friend, and trying to get out and make a left turn from Center Street onto 49 when it's dark. There's no light at that intersection of Center Street and 49, and it's very difficult to see vehicles coming either up from Jackson or from San Andreas the other way, and so it's a visibility speed problem. And so my recommendation, if you gentlemen can look into it, is to put a four-way stop at the intersection of 49 and 26. It will slow the traffic down. It'll make it that you can take turns, making your turns. And then the other solution that I'm recommending would be to put a dusk to dawn light right at the end of Center Street.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Good morning, Vicki Reinke. I'm not going to talk about marijuana. We're going to change the subject. And I am going to be speaking on behalf of the Calaveras Republicans. And it has to do with the Wild and Scenic River designation. You're probably aware of this, but I just wanted to make sure that you as a board are paying attention and will weigh in on, there's the new study that was done on the ability to make it a designated wild and scenic river, 37 miles of the Mokelumne. In the past, the past Board of Supervisors in 2014 passed a resolution supporting a wild and scenic river designation, and there was a lot of opposition to that. And after that vote was taken, there was at least one supervisor who realized they should never have voted for it because of what a wild and scenic river designation means. So we're still opposed to it. This study was being done because of well, actually, let me just back up a little bit. So the first time it came up was in 2014, and it was SB 1199, which was by Lonnie Hancock, and they wanted to make the 37 miles of our river, Mokelumne, a wild and scenic. What is a wild and scenic river? It means that you cannot, it must stay free flowing, and you cannot divert water or put dams on that river. That's kind of what a wild and scenic does. And we're opposed to that because it takes the water rights away from future generations. So I'm asking that you guys look into this and maybe do a new resolution based on current facts. I know at the time the water districts were opposed. I think Dennis was maybe on CCWD at the time. So there was opposition from all the water districts. And then there was another bill, AB 142, which asked for a study of the river before a designation. Well, sadly, and we were opposed to that piece of legislation once it got amended, because who does those studies? It's the resource in department here in California, and they're very much environmentalist, and of course they're going to come out with a study that says it should stay wild and scenic. Anyway, that study's out now. You can put comments to it. I'd really like our Board of Supervisors to relook at that and maybe change that to an oppose for our river. We already have dams. Oh, sorry. But anyway,
Thank
I
you, Ms.
hope that
Rankin.
you will look at that.
Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Danielle Maxwell, Avery, JJ's mom. I'm here this morning to share my experience. We do this at the state capitol for seizures. That also, the noise from the clapping could cause one to go into a seizure. So I don't just want to follow up on that. It's never a negative thing. It's out of respect for one's medical conditions or needs or disabilities. Anyways, my son has 4 wisdom teeth removed yesterday at UCSF. It took me 5 months to be able to have this procedure done. In between those 5 months, we went to 3 different dentists that said they would put him under general anesthesia. And when we got there, they did local and then decided in the middle of it that they weren't going to do it because of his tics. So Mom, and I, meaning me, and him, we packed a bag and we went down to UCSF ER, and I sat there and demanded an oral surgeon to see my son, the on-call oral surgeon. He got me a consult the next day. This was like February or January 27th, and he just had surgery yesterday. I'm not going to be able to be here for the item Agenda 34, but I also am going to speak on that. But during this time, California Children's Services is a state-ran thing, medical. They cover specialties, and in this county, it's ran per county or units. We don't have a very good MTU, which is a medical therapy unit. So my son does go down to Modesto, but it took me over 3 weeks just to get a hold of Susie and get an authorization for this. She is in the office only Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 1:30. We have one person working this whole county 2 days a week for 2.5 hours. And this person was sick and she had things going on, so no other person could do her job. And my son suffered majorly. And we think this is why he's having seizures, because of the pain. He's nonverbal. Hence why I'm applying for the position of a consumer position on the advisory committee for in-home support services. I filled out the application that was provided to me, and I'd like to give this correspondence to the board. And thank you, Diane, for getting back to me. But I would like to leave the last 20 minutes for my son. 20 seconds. We thank you, and I hope this board can look into stuff to make it easier so our children doesn't suffer in pain.
Good morning. I would like to be the first one to do the act of kindness. I would like to thank the chair, Tofanelli, for being able to meet with people. I know that you meet with people that are outside your district. I know that you meet with people that you might not necessarily agree with, and some that you agree with, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. Hello, hello, hello. Mr. Supervisor Mills, one of the hardest working gentlemen I think I've ever known in my life. He will take phone calls from his constituents well past 10 o'clock in the evening, always has our back. I want to thank you. Also, Supervisor Clapp, I was very sorry to see that you were facing a recall. And I want to thank you too, because you also will meet with people outside of your district. I know you all work very hard. I want to thank you all, and this is my act of kindness. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about sanctuary state. I think that it would be very important for us. I know I brought this up last year, but I would like us to put on the agenda to stand against the sanctuary state. And the reason being is I think it's real important for us because we're going to be needing things from President Trump. And this is something that President Trump is very much opposed to. So I think we need to have his back and make sure that we stand in some of the things that he wants to get accomplished so that we can get some of the funds we need. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is something that I found in the Carmel Pine Cone. I love the Carmel Pine Cone, by the way. It's regarding the TOT, which is the occupancy taxes. And there was an article in the Pine Cone that there was a couple from Pacific Grove that were fined $90,000. $90,000 for not getting their transient occupancy taxes. So I don't know that we have any fines now, but I want you to know that I called and I did some research. Asilomar in Pacific Grove does do a tax of 10%. The lodge at Pebble Beach is 10.5%. And Pine Inn in Carmel is 20%, and they also tack on the assessments for the city of Carmel. So I would love for us to look at another way of bringing in money, because I know everybody's always talking about money. And I think that it would be a great thing for us to look at the occupancy tax and look at fines, because I happen to know that there was actually a person that worked for the county that was doing an Airbnb and wasn't doing anything about collecting his occupancy taxes. So please look at the occupancy taxes. Also, the sanctuary is super important. I would love to see that on the agenda. Thank you, gentlemen, the 5 of you, for all the work you do. I certainly appreciate you.
Thank you.
This I would like to hand to them. It's the Carmel Pine Cone article.
We are going to take 2 more speakers, and then we're at our limit. Board clerk just made me aware of it. So 2 more, and then we'll put it off to the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Good morning, Board. Over the last couple of weeks, I get the Nixel notifications from the Sheriff's Department, and I think the count is now up to like 4 or 5 indoor grows that have been busted in the Valley Springs area. When I look at the photographs of those grows, as a former contractor, retired contractor, I wonder where the interior walls went. The houses appeared to be gutted and have a few posts holding the ceiling up with equipment and wires and everything else hanging down. And these are in neighborhoods. Now I'm wondering, is there a plan to take care of this? Who is going to be leading the task force to take care of these problems? As I understand it, the ban ordinance is now in effect. I think it went into effect yesterday. I could be wrong on the date, but it's 30 days since you passed it. We're going to get more of these problems as we start cracking down on the illegal growing in this county. What about the neighbors who live next door? What's inside those buildings? Are they a hazard to kids getting in there? Are we going to start putting boards on the doors and windows? Is our goal to make Valley Springs look like Detroit? Are we going to have boarded up houses with warning signs, skulls and crossbones, yellow tape? And how about some of those panels of chain link fencing we could put around there? Maybe dress it up with a little concertina wire on the top. Are we ready to move forward to start cleaning these properties up and protecting the public? Are the neighbors to those properties going to have to live in fear of what is in those properties? What toxic chemicals could be there? Are kids going to get in there? Is the place going to explode? Is it going to cave in during the wind? And what's it doing to their property values? Marijuana has brought nothing but grief and heartache to this county. It has resulted in the loss of property values and way of life. It is up to this board to take care of this problem. I'd like to see who is going to be on the task force. And I would hope that the board will not abdicate its authority and responsibility to take care of this and kick this down the line for the people to vote on. What do we do about cleaning up the mess here? You guys are in charge. This is a republic, this is representative government. We elected you to do the job. We are not here to do the job for you. Please do your job. Please protect the citizens of this county. And please do the first thing you took an oath to protect, and that's the safety of the citizens of Calaveras County. That's job 1 for you. Please do it so that we can all move forward as we start going through this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madden.
Hi, Susan Morse, Angels Camp. I just have a little housekeeping comment I want to make. I felt this morning as public comment was starting that maybe we need to be reminded of Rule 46 of the Calaveras County Board of Procedures, and that's about orderly conduct. And because today may be contentious during the day, I'd like to remind all of us here, what this rule is. Each person who addresses the board shall not make personal, impertinent, slanderous, or profane remarks to any member of the board, staff, or general public. Any person who makes such remarks or who utters loud, threatening, personal, or abusive language or engages in any other disorderly conduct which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of any board member meeting shall, at the discretion of the board chair or at a majority of the board, be barred from further audience before the board during board meeting. And that's Government Code 54957.9. So I can feel already the contention in the room just standing in the back, and I'm just asking everyone here, this next week's going to be Kindness Week, I guess. Let's try to be kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. I've been asked to take one by County Council, so we're going to be a break for 10 minutes, and I think they'll give you a chance to set up. Okay. All right, we're back in session. Madam Clerk.
So I'd like to make a quick announcement. Sorry. A cell phone was found out in the parking lot. If you are missing your cell phone, please check with me at the lunch break. Consent agenda. Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Any board member which to remove any item from consent?
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
I
Supervisor
request
Olvera.
Item 12 and item 14.
I had 14 as well.
You had 14 as well. Supervisor Garamendi.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to request items 23 and 24.
Anyone else? Anyone from staff?
13.
Anyone else from staff? Anyone from the public? Yes, stand up and say so I can hear.
Number 14, number 16, number 22, and
Well, hang on. 14's already been pulled. Okay.
16, 22, 25.
Anyone else? Yes.
Number 11.
Anyone else?
Why don't we just take it off all of Keller?
23's already pulled. Anyone else? All right, if not, I'll bring it back to the board for the remaining items.
I move the remainder, Chair.
A motion by Supervisor Mills,
I'll second that.
second by Supervisor Clapp. Is there any public comments on any of the other ones? If not, I'll bring it back to the board for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's 5-0. Madam Clerk, item number 11, this was pulled by George Fry.
If you'll give me just a second here.
When we do this, if you pulled your item, you come up and make your statement, your questions, or anything you want to do or want to say, and staff will answer the questions, and then we'll go forward from there.
Okay, item 11 is from the Elections Department. Adopt a resolution ordering a special municipal election, allowing the City of Angels to submit a measure to the voters for approval and consolidating said election with the June 5th, 2018 statewide primary election.
Mr. Fry.
Good morning, George Fry. My question is, what is this item about? I don't have any idea what this item is about.
Okay.
Good morning, Rebecca Turner, Registrar of Voters. This item is the city wants to request that their treasurer and clerk are appointed versus elected. So they're going to the people to ask that they change that status. The only thing the county is involved in is putting it on the election for them. And at this point, there's no reason for, the only reason you would not consolidate it with the election is if we had reason to believe it would impact the rest of our election, and I have no reason to believe that, so I recommend passing the item to consolidate with our election.
So really, any other questions that need to be addressed on it would have to be at the City Council, towards the City Council.
Correct.
All right. Any public comment? If not, I'll bring it to the board for a motion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
Ms. Turner, could I have you return to the podium? Seeing that this is an election for the City of Angels, what costs are incurred by the county and are they reimbursable by the city?
Part of us conducting an election for a special district or the city is they're required to reimburse us, so there should be zero cost to the county.
Zero cost to the county. In other words, any cost in a portion of the printing of the ballot, is that reimbursable by the city or another special district?
Yes, anything that is incurred to the county for conducting this election would be billed to the city.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I have a motion. Or any questions, any other board questions?
I'll move the item.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills.
I'll second the item, Mr. Chair.
Second by Supervisor Oliveira. Any other conversation? If not, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, number 12, pulled by Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Item 12 is from Public Works to adopt a resolution amending the number of positions on the County Service Area 4 Diamond 20 Road Advisory Committee from 5 to 3 and amend the term expiration for member position 2, thereby staggering the terms.
Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Chair. I have issue with this. It looks like when comparing to other CSAs or CSDs, are the requirements of 5 members on that board? Could you answer that question, staff?
This is not converting it to a CSD. This is only reducing the amount of members.
Okay.
So does that address your question?
Is this a CSD?
No, it's not. It's a CSA.
It's an advisory committee?
It is an advisory committee. They currently have 5 members and they are unable to fill all 5 positions. So it is at the discretion of the supervisor for the district that the CSAs are in to request that the board consider changing the amount of members. So that's what this is. It was done in 2015 with 2 CSAs that were in another part of the county.
So we actually have done this in the past? Mm-hmm. Okay. Could I ask what the estimated population is of this particular advisory board? What sphere of influence they would have? I'm trying to determine if 3 or 5 is a correct number, or which one would be the correct number.
I don't know that there's necessarily a correct number. What the case is here is they are unable to get 5 people to be on this advisory committee. So in reducing it to 3, it is the hopes that this committee will actually be able to have meetings.
So we're kind of changing the law because we don't have enough participants? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's not changing the law. We're just changing how many advisory members there are.
We have other CSAs with 3 members.
Mm-hmm, we do.
Do you know where those CSAs are?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, no, I'm sorry.
Maybe my fellow
Jeff might know.
supervisors?
Mr. Krovitz might know.
Mr. Krovis.
Sorry, Jeff.
You're on the spot.
Thank you, Jeff Krovitz, Public Works. I don't know the answer to your question, Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Krovis. Next. I'm sorry.
But I can clarify something. This is within our ordinance that allows the supervisor from in whose district the CSA exists to request the board at large, which is the CSA for all CSAs in the county, to add or reduce the numbers of the advisory board members. So we're not making things up.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. Supervisor Mills?
Yeah, I'd like to add to the discussion because this has been an ongoing concern since I took the seat, and that 2 of the members are in the same household. And when you have 3 members, then you suddenly have a Brown Act problem. So one of the 2 have agreed that they would resign. The person who has been on this committee in name only has agreed to resign, and 2 other members of the CSA have agreed to step up and place their applications. So there will be 3 within that CSA here very quickly as soon as we complete this piece. But the other alternate is that they haven't been able to hold any annual meetings or give updates to other members of their CSA as a result of this problem. So this resolves a lot of things for them in how they're presented to the board.
That explains a lot. Thank you, Supervisor Mills. Thank you, Chair.
Supervisor Clapp, your light is on. Do you have a question?
No.
No? Supervisor Garamendi? No? Okay, we'll open up for public comments on this issue.
Joan Wilson. I would hate to see people not being represented. I don't know what they've done to go about getting people to work on this CSA, but perhaps they should put it up to a vote for those people that are going to be affected. If they want to reduce the number. Maybe some of those people don't even know that they're looking for people to be on that board. Just sounds fair to me. Thank you.
Would you like to respond? So to address the comment made by Ms. Wilson regarding what's been done in the past to try to recruit members, and maybe they should put it to a vote. They can't have a vote because they don't have enough members to have a quorum, to have a meeting, to have a vote. So we need to do something. It doesn't mean that down the line, if they had lots of interest, that they couldn't increase the amount of members on that advisory committee. But at this point, we're just trying to get it so that they can actually do the business they need to do.
My name is Russ Thomas, and I have some familiarity with the situation out there in the Diamond 20 subdivision, going back to when I was sitting in as a supervisor. There's about 185 parcels out there. Most of them are unoccupied, absentee owners out of the area, so that the 2 people that you talked about have been really, nothing would have happened in the last 20 years out there if it hadn't been for their stalwart efforts. I recommend that you make this change. It'll allow them to get their work done more efficiently and legally. So anyway, vote for it.
Bill Wilson. It seems that there's not enough members of this neighborhood to get 5 people together to have a committee. So we're going to reduce that to 3 members. The gentleman just said most of those properties are empty. I thought these were neighborhoods that we had to keep things out of and we had to regulate things. And now we're going to reduce it to 3 people because we can't even get 5 people in the neighborhoods to come together to go to a meeting. Seems strange to me. Isn't this one of the areas that we were all up here pounding on the podium saying we need to keep things out of these neighborhoods? Seems to be. We were just told that it isn't a neighborhood. It's a bunch of blank land, a bunch of empty parcels out there where there's only a few people that are even interested. Have we tried putting up notices at, say, the mailboxes where they enter the property? I assume that's probably it. We do the same thing at Circle 20, and if there's enough people that are concerned with something the road association or the road committee or county service area is going to do, we have 20, 30 people show up to a meeting. We have no problem putting 5 people on there, but we're not a neighborhood. We're a subdivision. We're just a bunch of 20-acre parcels out there. Many of those are blank. Many of those taxes haven't been paid on. Many of those, people don't pay those taxes until the very day they go up for auction. Seems to me, limiting the number of people because you can't get enough people seems to be a problem with the people in that subdivision.
Any other public comments on this?
George Fry, it really saddens me that with 100 and some odd parcel owners out there, that they can't get a committee of 5 together. That's really disappointing. I mean, this is their opportunity to speak up, and they're not willing to do that for whatever reasons. What I would suggest that takes place is that you send a letter with their taxes included, that letter in the tax bill, and get them to get together and do something about rectifying this. I'm really leery of any organization that has only 3 people on the committee. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Supervisor Mills, this is your district.
Yeah, I would also make mention, I know of several cemetery districts and at least, I think, one lighting district that also has just 3 members. Just a point. If it's okay, I would like to make a motion to approve the item.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills. Do I have a second?
I would second that.
A second by Supervisor Clapp. Any other comments, discussion? If not, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Supervisor Oliveira, no. 4-1. Madam Clerk, item number 13. This was pulled by Mr. Krovitz.
Item 13 is from Public Works to adopt a resolution authorizing the Public Works Department to apply for funding through the Calaveras Council of Governments Call for Projects fiscal year 2019-20 through fiscal year 2022-23.
Thank you. Jeff Krovitz, Public Works. I'm going to approach with a handout. This is a call for projects through funding from the COG for the next 3 years. Public Works looked at the call for projects, looked at many of the projects on our list that we discussed last fall under SB1, and assembled a proposed list of projects that are contained in your board packet, many of which we have discussed, actually almost all we have discussed in great detail at previous meetings. We have identified 5 projects. What you're handed is a ranking sheet, a priority sheet, prioritization sheet. This number of projects or the priorities is not necessarily the end-all be-all, but for this round, it would be nice if we could, we together, that means Public Works and the board, decide on the projects and prioritizations of those that are on the list. Just because the board takes the action and passes a resolution and then helps me with the prioritization today, doesn't necessarily mean that these are going to get funded. The way that we ranked these projects is identified on the ranking sheet. You'll see that all of these projects have been around, almost all the projects have been around for quite a while, and the way we did the Public Works internal ranking was that we gave highest priority or highest rank to those projects that represented a public safety or a risk to the county. The second priority that we were giving, or the second tier priority, was what is the milestone where these projects are at within their completion process, and how close are they to completion? So if a project has gone through initial planning, has gone through environmental documentation, and potentially even gone through final design, and the only thing we're waiting for is construction money, then that was going to receive a higher ranking than a project that just has completed a planning process and has not got environmental clearance to move ahead. The third prioritization criteria is what is the beneficial impact of the completed project? And that becomes a numbers game. How many users do we have? Does the impact of a given project being completed affect the county regionally or two regions at either end of the project, or is it a very localized problem? So the regional one would have a higher ranking than the localized problem. The fourth would be coordination with adjacent projects. If we have adjacent projects that are moving into construction or that are already in planning, then if it's beneficial to the funding, we could advance it. If the adjacent project, which is ones that we're looking at, needs more time to plan, then we'll push it out to make sure that it occurs after we've completed construction on an adjacent project. So it's partially what Supervisor Garamendi has been pushing for coordinated CIP, but it's also kind of a coordination of what can be leveraged. Not necessarily in terms of funding, but in terms of project approval and project execution. And then finally, affordability. Is it an affordable project? If it's a giant project, multi-million-dollar project, our ability or our competitiveness in the funding arena is lower. If it's a smaller project, we can rise up higher because it's a relatively smaller amount. So that's the criteria. The projects, just briefly, Burns Ferry Road, left turn pocket at Poker Flat. This project's been in place for 2 decades?
20, yes.
20 years. Thank you, Supervisor Mills. And where we're at is, with this current project, is we have completed design. We've completed utility relocation plans. PG&E was to have completed the pole relocation this month. It got delayed when they discovered they have another pole. So it's currently in design to pick up the last pole that they have to relocate, and then they will start construction. Encroachment permits have been let, and so this one is one of those projects that A, is a safety project, B, design and environmental are complete, and the only thing we're lacking is construction funds to complete the road widening portion. Okay? Valley Springs Elementary School improvement projects, we've talked a lot about this one. This one is currently in a partnership planning grant. We're working with our consultants in the COG to get our traffic counters out in appropriate places. So this is moving ahead with the anticipated expectation that we can be successful at an ATP grant, Active Transportation Program grant, to get us into the preliminary engineering and environmental document phase. And then what this project is asking for is funds to do the design phase. Because that one is going to be very expensive if it actually gets executed in the way that A, needs to have happen or may very well happen. Hoover Road Bridge, very inexpensive project. We ended up having to add an alternative to this bridge replacement program to allow us to consider a low water crossing and not just bridges at the request of the neighborhood. It's one of the last projects in the state of California that will be allowed to be funded this way for a low water crossing. And so we have just over an 11% match to add that last alternative to the project so that we can then complete our environmental documentation, move into construction. We do have construction funds for this project. So, and again, it's a very low dollar amount. So this is one that's close to the finish line, doesn't cost much, and it puts us over the top. Polk Street Bike Path, it's linking our on-campus bike path with the elementary school and the high school. Asking again for funds for preliminary engineering, preliminary environmental document. This project has a current partnership planning grant to do the planning studies necessarily to move it forward. There's a midsection that will be constructed with the Mountain Ranch Road Sidewalks Improvement Project. So this is one of the projects that we want to make sure that we've completed this little midsection before moving this ahead. And I think the timing will work. Murphy's Complete Streets. This is another partnership planning grant up in Murphy's to try to do pedestrian or non-motorized vehicle improvements in and around Highway 49 between the park below Penn Gulch, Highway 4, thank you, Supervisor, in Murphy's, pedestrian improvements. And we feel like this is a good competitive project because we have Caltrans shop projects that are coming in the area. So if we can get some grants and we can add our grant funding to that, we might be able to move this quicker. The San Andreas SR49 Commercial Gateway Corridor, very expensive project. It really talks about a roundabout to try to slow traffic coming into the San Andreas region from the south, and it also is providing access to commercial development on both sides. I don't know how many of you have recently driven up 49 through Plymouth, but there is a very similar roundabout that is nearing completion at E16, which is a county road for Amador and El Dorado counties, at State Route 16 going into Sacramento, and Highway 49 at the northern end of Plymouth. Construction is nearing completion. I think another month or two will do it, but you can see how that's working. But that's similar to the concept of this particular project on the south end of the San Andreas area. And finally, the railroad flat guardrail. This is one that we talked about in the SB1 call for projects. With the loss of all the trees along that corridor and the removal of all those trees in the debris removal program, we have a concern with a safety issue. It's a canyon that's steep. In the wintertime, it tends to be very icy, doesn't see the light of day, so we don't get ice melting off, and we have a creek right below it. So the idea would be to do about 1,400 feet of guardrail to keep the cars on the road. So it's a safety project. It's not overly expensive. And that kind of lets you know how and why Public Works has come up with its ranking. So I'll take questions on this, and thank you for listening.
Chair, just also, Jeff, as you're aware, Poker Flat did contribute $60,000 towards that left turn pocket as well. That's been held in escrow.
That's correct.
So it isn't just simply a county project, but there is a public-private partnership going on with this project to get it completed. So I appreciate their willingness to do that so many years ago, and it's a clear understanding of the safety aspect of that if you've ever been down in that area as to what that speed and visibility looks like. So thank you for pushing that forward.
Any other board comments or questions? If not, I'll open it for public comment. Any public comment on this item?
Bill Wilson again. It's a shame we don't have tax money. Shame we don't have a surplus of general funds to fund these projects. We have to go out and get special grants and beg from people to support ourselves. We can't do that here in this county, it seems like. I think all of those projects deserve to be elevated to the funding level. I think they should be funded. I think they should have been funded with tax money from a project that today sunsets. We don't have any more Measure C money coming in anymore, gentlemen. We don't have any more regulation in this county. Hope you can find the money in those dog licenses. Thanks.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Mills,
I second it.
second by Supervisor Garamendi. I think he was in by a whisker.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead,
oh,
you
I'm
need
sorry.
one. Go ahead. You need one.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Garamendi.
Question? Is the motion on the table to adopt the resolution and accept the Public Works prioritization?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, item number 14. This was pulled by Supervisor Olivera.
So item 14 is from the Board of Supervisors to adopt the proposed bylaws template for all citizen boards, committees, and commissions under the jurisdiction of the Board of Supervisors.
Supervisor Olivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question I have is, this applies as a boilerplate format for the committees that are governed by the Board of Supervisors. Does that include organizations like COG?
No.
Okay, those are
No, it does
separate.
not. It applies to the boards, the citizen boards, committees, and commissions that the Board of Supervisors makes appointments to. COG, LAFCO, those types of organizations are separate. We assign, or the board assigns members of the board to participate as representatives, but they are a different, separate entity.
All right.
These are just the citizen boards, committees, and commissions. There are 34 of them.
Right. So those entities that are identified by a JAP or JPA?
What the COG and LAFCO or whatever, those? Or these that we're talking about?
No, you said 34 committees.
There are 34 committees of which you,
Of which
the
COG
board,
and LAFCO
no,
are part of.
No, not at all. There are 34 committees, citizen boards, committees, and commissions that the Board of Supervisors appoints the members to. That includes the various committees. It includes the CSA advisory committees. It includes cemetery districts. It includes the Fish and Game Commission, et cetera.
So would it be a fair statement to say that those committees that are governed by the Board of Supervisors? Is that a fair statement?
I don't believe so. I believe that they are groups that are appointed by the Board of Supervisors and act in an advisory capacity to the Board of Supervisors.
Advisory only, then. Is that correct?
No, it's not.
I'm
I
not
guess I
asking
don't
that
understand the question and where we're going. These groups are required to meet under the Brown Act. They're required to, in some cases, file Form 700s. They are an extension or an arm of the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors appoints its members to act in a capacity on their behalf.
That's a great explanation. That one I'll take.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Mills.
I actually, I pulled this item as well. Seeing Lutz, I'd like you to look at page 58. This would be Article 2 and number 2, where the question is, if in order to ensure quorum is present, any commissioner is unable to attend a meeting. There are some of those meetings that occur in the early morning, 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning. So for them to contact the chair by noon the day of the meeting wouldn't fit.
Okay, so these are drafted by our office, and we could definitely include language that says, or the day prior to the meeting.
I would just, that's all I'm asking for here, is
Sure.
just a clarity to be sure that they're not contacted after the meeting's over.
Sure, and that makes sense. So would that, do you think that inserting or the day prior to the meeting would be sufficient?
Or would it be a certain amount of hours, like 24 hours prior to a meeting kind of thing, be even better? I'm just offering suggestions here to get around this language that's here now.
It's up to the board.
Any other board Comments on that?
Madam Clerk, excuse me, Mr. Chair. Madam Clerk, this is a template. So if there's a committee that's got something that they specifically feel they need to put into their bylaws, this gives us the flexibility to, within this format, insert something in there, correct?
It does. We have a couple of groups in particular. Most are operating without bylaws at all. And we have a couple of groups that are spending an inordinate amount of time trying to create bylaws and basically recreate the wheel. It's our hope that by giving them a template, and what we would do is we would insert the pertinence that are to them, you know, what their name is, what governing document they have, et cetera, and to assist them in trying to enable them to move on from the recreation of the wheel of bylaws to the other business at hand for these groups.
So this is not the hill to die on for your specific issue. This
It
is
is
a standard
not.
template that we could apply to the 30 other committees.
To the 40, yeah, exactly.
And the 3 that need special attention, we could go back and insert that stuff.
We would
as
be
move
inserting
along.
this for each one, and then providing it to them. Here's a template. If you have something specific that you
could add
feel
that
needs
in.
to be included in this, please respond back. We'll work with you to get it in there and to get it approved by the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Supervisor Olivera, your light's on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further comments. Okay, I'll open it up for public comments. Bonnie, you'll have to stay behind the line. He'll come and get it.
Your time has started.
Good morning. In the year 2013, all of these commissions and committees were given a directive to work on their bylaws. The IHSS Advisory Committee has spent the last 5 years researching the legislation that created our committee. We've been comparing with other counties. We've been changing and rechanging. And this whole experiment has been an incredible learning and growing experience. We want to have our bylaws considered rather than this template. And when this directive was given to these committees, maybe this template would have been helpful at that time. So I'm just wondering what the other commissions and committees have been doing in the last 5 years if they haven't been working on their bylaws, and why it got to the point that we now have a template that people are going to be using. Because it's very important to us that our committees' particulars are addressed. You may or may not be aware that this committee, the IHSS committee, was scheduled to be dismantled about 2 or 3 years ago because we were not able to have a quorum and we were not conducting meetings on a regular basis and doing business. So we've modified many, many parts of our original bylaws to include what we think is going to make our committee relevant and effective. So I'm sharing with you our bylaws so you can see what the work that we've done over the past 5 years, and also so that later on today on agenda item something, I will ask you to refer back to this document for clarification. Do y'all have any questions about anything that I could answer? Thank you.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any further discussion? If not, I'm open for a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second by Supervisor Oliveira. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Chair, item number 16.
Item 16 is from Public Health Services to authorize the board chair to sign agreement number 16-11071 with the California Department of Public Health, resulting in revenue in the amount of $10,631 for the 2-year period of June 1, 2017 through June 30th, 2019, and to approve the associated budget transfer, increasing revenue and expenditure object codes by $10,631, requiring a 4/5 vote.
I have an answer, but I think the community needs to know. This was not explained what the $10,631 is for, and so I would like Kristen to explain what this purchase is meant to provide for our county.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Kristen Brinks, Health and Human Services. This particular item is to accept revenue from the California Department of Public Health so that we may purchase naloxone or Narcan nasal spray that our local trained entities such as our substance abuse program staff, local first responders, law enforcement, etc., have the ability to administer this to community members who might be suffering from an opioid overdose. The purpose of the grant is to reduce the rate of fatal overdoses from opioids themselves, and this detail was provided in the staff report. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Kristen. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for a motion or discussion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Supervisor Garamendi,
I'll second it.
second by Supervisor Clapp. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, item number 22. This was again pulled by Bonnie Newman.
Item number 22 is from the Building Department to authorize the board chair to execute Amendment 4 to an agreement with Bureau Veritas North America Incorporated, increasing the current contract by $85,000 for a period of December 31st, 2017 through June 30th, 2020.
Yes, I just had a real quick question. I'm not sure what the project is that we're talking about, and I just wanted, it wasn't clarified here, and I'd just like to know what the money's being used for.
Good morning, Chair, Board. To answer the question, plan review and inspection services contract is a typical contract building departments use to provide inspections and plan reviews due to resource limitations at our building department. So we use inspectors, we use plan review services. That's what it's used for. Any other questions?
Is that wages?
It's hourly rates that we usually pay, or percentages that we pay out due for revenues that we collect. So it's full cost recovery, so there is no wages out of it. It's user fees used to pay for it. Any other questions? Okay. Any questions?
Any other
Okay.
question from the board? Any other public comments? If not, I'm looking for a motion.
So moved.
A move by Supervisor Garamendi,
Second.
second by Supervisor Oliveira. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Pass. And noes? Pass 5-0. I just want to make an announcement. We will be breaking for lunch at 12, from 12 to 1:30. COG, how long is your presentation? 15 minutes? Okay, I'm going to, we're going to finish the next 3 items here, and hopefully we have time. It'll be within the realm to get COG since they're here before we go to lunch. Okay? Item number 23, Madam Clerk.
Item 23 is from the Building Department to authorize the board chair to execute Amendment 2 to an agreement with Four Leaf Incorporated, increasing the current contract by $200,000 for a total of $300,000 from December 31st, 2017 through June 30th, 2020.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you very much, and sorry for keeping you around all afternoon, Ed, all morning. Ed, I have two questions on this item when I read through it over the weekend. As you're aware from your industry group, there's been issues about moving things quickly through, and I know you've been working very hard to rectify that. So my first question is this extension going to speed up the process of inspections and plan checks? And the second question I've got for you is, can these funds be, you have a certain amount of employees that are employed under urgency ordinance and urgency ordinance for inspections. Is it a good use of funds to use this money for this contractor, or should we begin thinking about transitioning some of those funds into transitioning cannabis code folks into full-time so we build our internal capacity rather than building the external capacity? So it's a question of use of funds and how we're going to transition past or through cannabis and keep some of these skilled people that you've trained up. We've spent a lot of effort into bringing these people on board.
That's correct.
I want to find out how we're going to do that.
Well, let me answer the first one and see if I can answer the second one. The first one is yes, this is to provide better services, speed up things. And we have lost a plans examiner, and we had 2 inspectors out, and we have another one out on an extended leave.
Right.
So we're kind of in a quandary where we have to have services right now as we're going out to replace with staff as we're announcing through HR. So that takes a time to recruit. So we've had successfully recruited one really good inspector here. We got online as soon as we got him on board. Another one went out. So we're constantly battling the resources.
It helps you bridge that gap.
To bridge that gap. These contracts are very specific to inspection services. They're not related to cannabis activities. So to answer your second question, we're looking comprehensively at the budget with the CEO and everyone and staff to figure out how much we can absorb, how much we can do to try to maintain those services in the gap, as we don't quite know what's going to happen here today or in June with possible regulation or a vote. But we are trying to figure out a way to do that, try to maintain the staff as much as possible. But that's, if we can get some more staff to hire this, we can lower contracts amounts, then we can keep more money in. That's the game we have to play to try to keep the resources in-house. But that's still an unknown right now. So.
Okay, I have no problem with this. I just want to make sure that as we look at the budgets, we think about what's going to happen in June and July, and how we could use some of that funds to, if we've got talent, retain it.
And as I mentioned to the board earlier, we're also into a fee study to try to kind of bring some fees, because code enforcement didn't have any fees there. So we're looking at that also as an option to bring to the board here soon as a fee study comes in within the next 90 days. So that's also part of the plan too. Because the code enforcement didn't have really any fees to compensate for code enforcement officers. So we're also looking at that strategy also.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other board questions, comments? If not, public comments.
What is this money going to do in terms of building violations? Are they going to stay right on top of the building violations?
Again, this is specific for building and department, not the code compliance. So as far as code compliance, we are doing our best to keep up with the priorities as far as code compliance. And we have a priority list. I'm working with the supervisor and everybody on that list. So we are doing our best as to going with the most important code compliance would be health and safety, anything with safety issues, anything with environmental problems, anything with something that will create immediate problems, and then we go down a priority list, but we do have a very large list to go down.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Supervisor Garamendi. Second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Second by Supervisor Oliveira. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, item number 24. This was pulled by Supervisor Garamendi.
Item 24 is from the Building Department to approve and sign the First Amendment to the Services Agreement between the Calaveras County Building Department and Matthew L. Brown, adopting the fee, tool, and equipment schedule dated October 2nd, 2017, which is different than Exhibit B listed in the original contract. Total compensation amount of the contract will not be affected.
Thank you very much, Ed. My specific question on this one is, we pay for Mr. Brown's services through urgency ordinance money, through the fees that we collect. We have this contract that's out there. We know that this legislative body is determined to ban. What are we going to do with this contract for eradication of cannabis, illegal cannabis, after the expiration of the urgency ordinance?
Well, this is intended to try to maintain the tools for abatement as we go along, not knowing exactly what's going to happen today or in the future. So we're trying to move forward, maintaining the contract. This is specifically was a contract that was in place, the schedule, to pay the bills that we already, I think we did about $86,000 for the abatement. As I mentioned to the board, a lot of it was volunteer abatement. So we did pretty good on costs, about $90,000. Some of that schedule was inadvertently left out when they came to the board before to make the equipment schedule to fit exactly what was happening in the field. So this is just really an update of the schedule to help pay those invoices that were articulating the equipment and the tools that were out there. So it was missing. So again, we want to maintain the contracts for potentially what's going to happen here in the future.
So we can't predict what happens in an election, but this body has deliberated and voted on that already. So the question is, once the urgency ordinance, how are we going to fund the eradication of illegal growth?
Well, we won't have any regulation money. Maybe Tim can answer a little bit more on that. But that's still unknown how we can go about that. We won't have.
Can you speak up?
We don't have. I'm sorry, I have a cold. We won't have any regulation money to pay these type of services because this will be paid out of the regulatory type of things. But again, some of it can be used under regular code abatement, which we can transpose that over to code abatement and then maybe use teeter funds, but that's again another strategy we would have to look at because we don't want to lower the teeter fund accounts either. Maybe Tim can.
I just want to make sure that Mr. Brown is aware of that as
right.
Mr. Brown is aware of that as well. That
right.
You know, the faucet's turning off here.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Any other board comments? If not, open for public comment.
So if I understood that correctly, we're banning without a plan again. We have no funds to enforce the eradication unless we have self-eradication, which we had more of that than we had actual enforced eradication last year. If I'm not mistaken, we had somewhere around 25 to 50 that the sheriff responded to and close to 200 that actually self-eradicated. I wonder how many of the cartel grows that you guys are backing and the illegal grows that you guys are backing with this ban are going to self-eradicate? Or is this deputy over here going to be very busy this summer trying to fight illegal grows without funds? Maybe he'll volunteer to work for less than $24 an hour. I hope you guys have a good time.
Any other public comment?
Mike Falvey, Concerned Citizen, District 2. I guess this is above me, but you're voting on increasing funding for a position. This gentleman is a professional, and he's presents a good issue, a problem. But you're voting on. You voted by increasing this previous item, I think, by $200,000 on his contract, and most of that money is. I mean, is it going to, not eradication, it's going to building codes and compliance. Why are we donating so much money to these individuals that are mostly working on compliance, what I see, with like permit or code compliance issues with, say, illegal buildings? illegal grows, are they going to need that extra 200,000 if you're going to ban something? And if they do need it, and you do ban it, where are you going to get it? I'm just a little confused over these three items here. The money given to them, their increases, and where you're going to get it. It's a little hazy to me. Like I said, maybe it's above my pay grade, but it looks kind of funny to me.
Well, hopefully I can answer that. Basically, I just want to clarify for a point of clarity, the fees that are collected for building permit fees, user fees, have a direct nexus to building inspections and plan review. You cannot use that fee for code enforcement in a sense, because that's a separate action. So it would have to come up with another user fee or flat fees that we're going for our fee study to come up with code compliance, and that's going to happen in the next 90 days. Hopefully that clarifies the money issues with user fees.
One time, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, that's it.
All right. I'm speaking as a concerned citizen. We eliminate all these buildings being built. We don't need to bring in outside people.
One time. Any other public comments? Seeing none, bring it back to the board.
So moved.
We have a motion by Supervisor Garamendi. We have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Supervisor Clapp. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, item number 25 is pulled by Ms. Newman.
Item 25 is from Human Resources to adopt a resolution required by the Department of Justice to give the Human Resources Department access to federal background information.
Judy Hawkins is really mad at me. I made her stay longer, but I had some questions about this because when I read it, I was confused. Some of it's been cleared up, but I believe this is for hiring purposes in the county. And what does the federal background information include? What are they looking for? Are they trying to find how many arrests I've had or what my rap sheet's like, if I have a criminal background? Are they talking about terrorism? When I'm talking about federal background, I'm getting real leery. Are they going to be looking at my personal life, who I contact, who I have alliances with? And is there any money involved in this? Are we talking about DACA? Many questions.
Judy Hawkins, Human Resources Director. The IRS had put into place a mandate. So for Publication 1075, it provides guidance to U.S. government agencies regarding the access to federal tax information. And so the change is the mandate to this publication requires that any employees that has access to federal tax information has to go through a federal background check. We currently do a state fingerprinting process for all county employees, but Human Resources does not do a federal fingerprinting background check. And so for us to have access to be able to run that information, the Department of Justice requires a resolution giving us that level of access. Now, a federal fingerprint background will give us all criminal information. Now, what information is used, there has to be a direct nexus to that job. So if a potential hire or an employee that we currently have has been arrested for tax evasion, then we are not going to be able to use them in that position. But if they were arrested for some other form, jaywalking, then we're not going. That's not a direct nexus. So there does have to be a direct nexus to the job duties for us to be able to use that information. That information is kept within human resources.
So it's another layer to protect the public when somebody's all day doing social security numbers and so forth, that at least the person doing that, we've researched their background. They don't have
Exactly. And it's just those that are getting into the federal tax information. It's not, we're not doing that level on all employees. Now, there are employees, currently we do that level, law enforcement, probation, DA, but this is for mostly HHSA that it is affecting.
And I think one of the other questions she asked that wasn't answered was cost.
It's $35 to do the fingerprinting per employee.
Per employee. Okay. All right. Any other public comment? Seeing no public comment, coming back to the board, looking for a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Supervisor Oliveira.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Mills. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, we'll take a couple-minute break for COG to come up and get set up, and then we'll move with COG item number 31. Madam Clerk.
Item 31 is from the Administrative Office to receive a report from the Calaveras Council of Governments and Transit Policy Committee on the potential transition of the transit program from the county to a new provider, authorize the relinquishment of the transit program operated by the Public Works Department, and approve a joint powers agreement between the county, City of Angels Camp, and COG for transit services within the county.
Amber. You're up.
Amber Collins with the Calaveras Council of Governments. I'll actually hand it over to Phil McGuire with McGuire Management Consulting, who we've hired to help facilitate this process, and he'll walk us through the presentation tonight, and then we'll open it up for question and answers.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the formation of a new transit agency to assume responsibility for the operation of Calaveras Transit. A couple of words about why I was chosen to participate in this and guide the process. I've worked in the transit industry one way or another for many, many years, and included in that is work related to agency formations over the years. So just a couple of quick comments about that. Back in 2004-05, I was retained to guide the formation of transit service within the city of Elk Grove, and then was retained for a year following to manage that system. In 2007-08, I was also retained by Inyo and Mono counties to facilitate the formation of a joint powers authority there to create a new transit agency for the two counties and two cities in that region. And subsequent to the transition process, was also retained to be the first CEO for that organization for its first year. I was also a part of a study in Fresno County that considered the formation of a JPA there between the city of Fresno and the city of Clovis. And then more recently in Solano County, I was also very involved in the development of their joint powers authority, which resulted in the formation of a new agency combining the services of the city of Vallejo and the city of Benicia. I was also asked to run that operation for its first year, but had a competing situation in San Bernardino County, so I wasn't able to do that. So
Can we hold, Phil, can we hold on for a second? We've got Susie here desperately trying to find the right connection, so that people at home can see what we're looking at.
And could we also have you move the mic right in front of you so you're speaking directly into it? Thank you.
Sure.
Are we good? Okay, Phil. Sorry.
Very good. Thank you. So, for a bit of background on why to restructure Calaveras Transit, there have been many issues over the years, outlined some of them on this slide, The transit system performance over the years has generally been declining. Ridership has gone down, costs have gone up substantially. There have been issues with the timeliness of funding applications, and one of the results of that being the need for the county to fund transit services, at least on a temporary basis, out of the general fund. Not a positive situation. There have been issues with compliance with federal grants having to do with things like the award of a contract to a transit vendor. That process is underway right now, but has to do with, or its implementation has to do with then the availability of federal funds that are going to be used to pay for the cost of that contract. That's much behind schedule. There have been other studies, of course, that have looked at the possibility of an action like this to create a different transit agency structure, to provide more direct management of the operation, and also to achieve cost efficiencies and other efficiencies in the whole overall program. And then one of the important things about the current discussion is the inclusion, really for the first time formally, of the City of Angels Camp in the transit decision process. And so the formation of this Joint Powers Authority as proposed today would accomplish that. And then finally, as I touched on in an earlier bullet, the idea of eliminating the burden and liability to the general fund of the issue of continuing to carry the transit system in the absence of the immediate availability of transit funding. So why is this timing important? There are various compliance issues really pending right now. I touched a bit on in the reasons why to do this in the first place. These issues, the critical issues of compliance, need to be corrected very soon. Otherwise, there is the possibility of losing available funds. A new contract will be before this board in the next month or so for award of a new transit vendor. And this is an ideal time for the transition of that process to a new operating authority. There are details I could get into about the nature of that procurement and the timing and structure, but the point is that that would be transitioned to the new authority during this transition period up to the point of the authority taking full responsibility on July 1. Obviously, the county presumes to end its process of loaning funds to the transit operation. That has off and on amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars through the course of a year in the face of otherwise available transit funding, which really should be achieved on a more timely basis. There is going to be a transition period necessary in order to effect all the changes that are associated with this. So as I'll talk about in a couple of minutes regarding the schedule for this, the transition period would allow for the transition of that vendor contract to the new authority, and also transition of things like the assets that are associated with transit and various other agreements that are necessary for the operation of a new authority. Let's look at some of the steps that are involved in this. Back in the summer, the city and this board appointed people to a policy group to guide the development of this new Joint Powers Authority. That group has been meeting ever since. The group chose, through the COG, to retain me back at the beginning of November to guide this process and bring my experience to the table in accomplishing the various things necessary to implement a new transit authority. One of the things that the policy group did back actually in November was agree to a list of guiding principles which were put before the group to really provide some structure to the formation of this process. And among those guiding principles were agreement by the participants, which included 2 supervisors, a council person from the City of Angels Camp, the chief executive from the county, the city manager from the city, and the executive director from COG, to agree that the intended form of a new transit agency would be a Joint Powers Authority. And that in doing that, the intent was that that new authority be created and in place by April 1 of this year. And finally, that the new authority assume full responsibility for transit management by July 1 of this year. There were also various other principles included in that list, mostly to do with cooperation among the various agencies that are participating. The policy group guided the formation and development of the JPA agreement that is before you today. It was debated at length in policy group meetings, again with the representation I mentioned, down to actual language on each and every item contained in the JPA agreement draft. Once the policy group agreed on the language in the draft, that draft was sent back to the jurisdictions so that county council here and the city attorney for Angels Camp could have an opportunity to look at that, as well as legal counsel for the COG. All of those opportunities for legal review were completed and incorporated into the draft that you have before you for action today. The policy group then unanimously recommended approval of the JPA agreement and to move forward with the restructuring of the transit agency. Some of the expectations of this process are that a new agency dedicated to transit as a single function would be important, and instead of it being a part of a much broader agenda here within the county, would be governed by its own policy organization and then set up such that it could be operating more efficiently in conjunction with Council of Governments. The idea was to broaden the decision-making process, as I mentioned at the very beginning, to include the city for the first time. So obviously there will be city representation on the new Joint Powers Authority. The new organization is intended to streamline the grant application process and allow for much more timely receipt of funds to get the county out of a situation where it has for quite some time been in a position to loan funds to support the transit operation. And then finally, the last three critical items, it's expected that there will be staff efficiencies associated with this. I'll talk a little bit about the structure of that in a minute. There will be other cost efficiencies as a result of this, partly by just streamlining processes so that there is an opportunity for really timely receipt of all of the range of funds that are available for transit operation here in the county. And lastly, to increase the accountability and transparency of the transit function, again, in part by having its own governing structure. I'll talk for a minute about the relationship of this proposed new JPA to Calaveras COG. Calaveras COG, as I'm sure you know, is also a joint powers authority, and the creation of this new JPA for transit will result in a separate legal organization. It will be a separate JPA. It is not the COG. It would be a new organization. As a result of those discussions I mentioned at the policy group level, the intent is that, and is embodied in the draft JPA agreement you have before you, that the board of directors of the new transit JPA would be the same board as is the board of the COG. And similarly, the officers of the new JPA would be the same as those of the COG, in spite of the fact that they are separate organizations legally. Now, the fact is, around the state, there are a number of joint powers authorities that operate according to that structure for transit purposes. And so there is really nothing new about this. That structure has been tested elsewhere and was deemed here to be the appropriate structure for Calaveras County. The intent then is for the new transit JPA, because of its relationship with the COG, to obtain staff services through an agreement with the COG. And so rather than employing employees directly itself, it will purchase staff services through the COG. Again, I'll talk about this in a minute, but all of the services necessary for the operation of the new JPA will be spread among other positions at the COG. So, for example, Amber, in her position as executive director, will dedicate a portion of her time to serving in that capacity for the transit JPA. And so similar with other of the employees of COG. The intent is for COG to fill an unfilled position for a transit planner, and in that new position also incorporate the necessary skill set to manage transit operations as well. And so that position would be also shared between the new JPA and COG. And of course, the JPA would ultimately manage the contract with the transit vendor here, which is the largest aspect of the overall transit management for the county. Certain milestones that are to be addressed between today and July 1. Obviously, the expectation is that the JPA would be adopted by this Board of Supervisors today. The item is before the City Council in Angels Camp a week from today for consideration as the same for adoption there. If both bodies adopt it, the JPA will be formed. The expectation is that it will be formed legally and in place by April 1, and that by July 1, or I'm sorry, I'll say in the period between April 1 and July 1, there will be this 90-day transition to allow for the assignment of contracts, the transfer of assets, and various other details associated with the transition process. And then that by July 1, the organization will be up and fully functional with full responsibility to manage the transit system. Just a quick rundown on some of the transition tasks, and there was a transition plan included in your board packet today, so there is substantial detail there. But the kinds of things that have to happen in order to make this work and to, again, get all of the aspects in place for the JPA to actually run the transit system include the assignment of the vendor contract to the new authority by July 1, a transfer of assets from the county to the JPA, most of those assets being in the form of the revenue equipment that operates the transit system. The coordination of funding between agencies. There are agreements for management of grants and so on that will also be transitioned during the period of April through July, or to July. The intent is that next year's budget, beginning July 1, for the new transit agency will not only be its first, but be full responsibility of the JPA. So it will not any longer be a county responsibility to prepare the budget and to submit claims for funds, but effective July 1, that will all become part of the responsibility of the new JPA. The intent also is that there be an agreement between the new JPA and the county auditor treasurer for accounting services. Again, this is very similar to the way the structure exists today with the COG. And there will be, I should say too, many similarities even in the structure of the accounting system between COG and the new JPA that will be facilitated by an agreement like that with the counties. There's much familiarity there already. With the formation of the new agency, there will be an opportunity to re-examine the whole issue of service deployment in the county and hopefully brings perhaps a new level of creativity to the formation of services, to introducing new concepts and ideas that might then ultimately be implemented by the JPA. And then going forward, the planning process and all consideration of policy issues in order to ensure compliance will be the responsibility of the JPA. So that concludes an overview of how we got here today. Again, it's been a fairly intensive process. There's been a range of participation in this, and the hope is that you would agree to the establishment of this new Joint Powers Transit Authority today. So I'll take questions.
Any board questions?
Mr. Chair, I have several. Are we going to
Sure, go ahead.
break for lunch first, or
Go ahead and ask your questions.
Okay. In your presentation, sir, you mentioned compliance issues. I'm not going to take the time of the board meeting here to go through all of those. Can you give me 2 or 3 of the most important ones or more severe ones that you're aware of?
I will, and perhaps Amber might have other thoughts to offer on this as well. One of the compliance issues that is pending is that I mentioned associated with the vendor contract. And the county was actually put in a position by Caltrans, who is responsible for reviewing that process, to move forward with a vendor procurement, even though the desire was to simply extend the existing contract for a bit longer in order to allow for a more thorough vendor selection process. And it was clear from Caltrans that they were not willing to allow that the county was sufficiently out of compliance that if the vendor procurement process, which is now underway, wasn't pushed forward and completed, then the county faced the loss of federal 5311 funds that are associated with payment for that contract. So that's happening on a rather hurry-up basis right now, and that's one major example where there are $245,000 or so at risk because of that. That's a major example. Another example of the financial issues that are really pending right now would include the fact that we're 8 months into the fiscal year and a TDA claim has not yet been processed between the county and COG for the availability of local transportation funds to support transit. And so what's happening in the meantime is the county is providing the funding to support the transit system until that action and others of a similar nature can be accomplished and the funding made available. These kinds of things are serious matters and are resulting in really the county being in a position to have to commit funds in order to continue the operation of the transit service. Does that help?
That helps a lot. Mr. Krovis, could I speak? Could you approach the podium for me, please? Mr. Krovis, is that accurate?
I would say the timing on it is accurate. There's not a lot of discussion on causation or results, but yeah, that's how it's been. That is how it has, transit has been operating for the last several years.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
I'm not done, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
So, in summation on your presentation, it looks like the county hasn't done a very good job, and transit's losing money. Is that a given? How is Angels Camp going to be able to improve that? Do you have any ideas or a concept of what can be done or what's been done wrong we can do right?
I guess the way I would answer that isn't so much what Angels Camp is going to be able to do to improve the situation, but for the first time, Angels Camp is going to be able to be at the table to make transit decisions. There certainly is transit service provided within the city. The city has an interest in transit service, and the way the structure exists right now, they have no real formal say in what happens with service deployment or other issues. So again, in JPAs, some of those I've been involved in the formation of, this very issue has come up where a jurisdiction is served by a transit operation, but really is not represented in the decision process associated with it. A new JPA will rectify that.
Is there any difference in the cost of the old and new JPAs? And that's kind of a vague question. What is the benefit of a new JPA financially?
The way we're approaching the budget process on this at the moment is to say that as we put the budget together, we're not necessarily looking for major cost savings right off the bat. I think there, in fact, will be cost savings. I referenced this in some of the bullet points with staff efficiencies and so on. And there are certain overhead charge issues that are associated with the county which will go away under the new Joint Powers Authority. The idea will be for the new authority to begin to look for cost efficiencies beyond those associated with staff and other cost considerations rather soon. And of course, one of the biggest items, and if I can give slight context in dollar amounts, the budget for transit is 1.1 million or so for the year, and about pushing 900,000 of that will be in the form of the vendor contract. And so I think as the new vendor contract is carefully scrutinized through its first year, there will be an opportunity to look for savings associated with that as well.
So as I understand this, should this JPA come to light here, and we have a board of directors actually serving for two different entities, but the same individuals, that Angels Camp will take on the financial responsibility, day-to-day expenses that the county has taken on in the past. Is that correct?
Not really. The financial responsibility will be that of the new JPA. I mean, it will be a legal authority with full financial responsibility, full liability, and so all of that will be put in place during the transition period and effective July 1. And so the City of Angels will be a participant in the Joint Powers Authority Agreement. Their TDA money contributes to the support of the operation, but otherwise they won't have any more direct responsibility for this than either entity will separately at that point, if that makes sense. The city and the county will no longer be directly responsible for financial management and so on. It will be the new authority that will take on that responsibility.
Okay.
Legally.
So if there's a deficit, who pays that deficit? County and city?
I guess I'll answer that two ways.
Okay.
I mean,
I'll wait.
one, I think that it will be easier under the auspices of a new transit authority to manage the financial process and the receipt of grants and so on. And I would say, given that, the likelihood of getting into a situation where there is a deficit that is unplanned is unlikely. However, if that were the case, then I believe that the relationship between the new JPA and COG is where one would go to look for the solution to that problem. And that has to do with the whole issue of availability of TDA or other funds that the COG is in a position, I think, to better manage.
So if that does occur, and we exhaust all those other possibilities, who pays the check? Is it the city and county, or just the city, or just the county? After the JPA is exhausted all other options.
Who's on the hook?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, that's part of the budgeting process and making sure you have a reserve for your operating for a few months out in order to pay the operations contractor. But part of it is really tracking your revenues, your state and federal revenues that come in to fund transit, and making sure that you're receiving those revenues when you need them. And if you don't, then I think you come and you start addressing budget issues at that time when it does happen. So you don't incur the costs without knowing that you have the revenues to cover those costs.
Any cost, additional cost would certainly come before this board and come before the city council before anything is done.
But the JPA, I'm sorry.
So,
go ahead.
But the JPA doesn't stipulate who's responsible. Any partnership says who's responsible for what. That's why, I mean, marriages, in many ways, are contracts too. How we divide the baby here. What is, to answer Supervisor Oliveira's question, who's on the hook in this partnership, to what degree, each partner?
Well, I think the JPA will be its own legal separate entity, so they will be responsible for any financial burdens themselves. So if some dramatic event happened and the JPA wasn't able to pay their bills, you know, they would just stop service. They would essentially at that point, unless, you know, they could come and approach the city council and board of supervisors, and if it's an extreme situation, they have to request funding, then it's the board, you know, the county and city's decision whether or not they want to continue those services. So it's not, you know, the situation you're in currently, you know, the general fund is floating the transit system when they don't receive revenues.
So
it'll
the
be
city,
a conscious.
the city conceptually could say, hey, you know what? We've got this JPA, we don't have enough money, we don't have any resources to pay it, we're going home. Who's ultimately on the hook? We are, right?
No, I think, the JPA itself is on the hook.
Can I
The
chime
county
in?
has no liability?
Can I chime in a second, please?
Yeah, hang on 1 second. It's no different than the COG JPA. If COG doesn't have funds, we're not on the hook for it. They're a separate legal entity in their own. It's not the city or the county that's responsible for it. Right now, the county has taken on the transit system, and so that's why we're paying every year, because not being kept up with timely turning in for the funds, we're floating up to $500,000-$600,000 every year, not only during the whole year, but even after the fiscal year, until those funds come in. We're trying to create an entity here that stays on top of that and timely files, much like COG does for transit funds.
Well,
So it's no different than any other JPA that we belong to. It doesn't mean that we're responsible for it. They're legal separate entities.
Does the county have a legal responsibility? I'm sorry. Clyde,
Go right ahead.
Anyway, and we had this coming from the board. Tim worked on it with Area 12. Area 12 has its own funding, and almost was going to be a delay in them getting funds that they knew they were going to get busy late. And then we went to all our counties and we said, can you loan us the money until X, Y, and Z happens? And I think that was in June, Tim, when that happened? And it came from the board here, and it was, the Area 12 was on the hook. They asked us if we could help them by giving them a short-term loan, and I think we did do that. But Area 12's on their own. I mean, we don't fund them. They get their own funding from other sources. We give them money at times. They'll come in front of the board and ask, can we have X, Y, and Z? But it's our decision if we give it to them.
I understand what you're saying. I think I'm speaking about something just a little bit different. Is there a legal obligation for this county to provide transit services?
There's particular funding sources
There's a
that are
legal-
dedicated to transit.
Yes.
So from the region's perspective, if you don't have transit services, then you don't receive those dedicated funds.
You said yes. She
Well,
said yes.
I mean,
but-
that gets to be a complicated answer.
Well, my
because-
question pertains to if, obviously I understand the JPA and I understand a separate legal entity. I'm just trying to figure out who's ultimately on the hook. If the county has a legal obligation to provide services like this and the JPA can't do it, does it eventually come back to us anyway?
It isn't really the county that has the obligation
Okay.
to do this. In rural counties like this, the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, which is COG, receives funding, TDA funding, from the state. It's collected locally. There is a requirement associated with that for the provision of transit services if there are unmet transit needs. This is where this gets a little complicated. There are always going to be, every county in California has transit service paid for by that funding source. Now, that funding source in places like here and most places around California is augmented by things like the federal 5311 that I mentioned, or in urban areas, really much different funding structure. But there is an obligation, really, because there are needs for transit service, to provide those. And the main funding source for that is TDA. And that is where, with TDA, you get all of the obligations, you get the legal requirements to meet unmet need obligations and so on to provide transit service. So how it's provided is really up to the RTPA to decide.
Correct.
And they can
Congress always
they can establish the county as the transit provider.
Mhm.
They can support the formation of a JPA as the transit provider. There are various service delivery options. But I would say in a county like Calaveras, the most common form is a JPA.
Okay, we're going to break right now for lunch. It's 12:15. We'll resume when we get back from lunch. We'll be in recess to 1:45.